You're listening to Gender, a Wider Lens.
I'm Stella O'Malley, a psychotherapist in Ireland.
And I'm Sasha Ayad, an adolescent therapist in the United States. Since 2016, my practice has been exclusively dedicated to gender questioning teens and families impacted by gender dysphoria.
I also work with gender questioning teenagers, and I facilitated support meetings for families and individuals who've been impacted by gender issues.
We're curious about the concept of gender and how it's unfolding in the wider culture.
Join us as we look at gender through a wider lens.
So, as you can tell from the title of this episode, this is a really serious and really important conversation that we had with someone who was seen by the Dutch, and it's a long conversation as well, which we'll explain a little bit more about that later. But before we get into the interview, we just wanted to take a moment and share some really exciting news with all of our listeners. So Stella and I were together for about a week at the retreat.
Yeah, and I have to say, we've just come back from the retreat, and the benefits of meeting in person was so evident even between you and I, Sasha. So we saw the parents. The idea of the retreat was the parents come together, and it was very powerful, very moving, some terribly harrowing stories, and yet some real beautiful communications and kind of warmth, and we felt depth of relationships were taking place before our eyes. Friendships were happening and created, and it was kind of beautiful. And then for us, you and me, we got a chance to strategize. We got a chance for what seems like the first time ever. We're 2 years into the podcast now. We never knew where it would go. We're thrilled. I think I love it. It's a very important part of my week. And I think from having met each other, we kind of thought, right, we can do things with this. We can go new directions. There's a lot of ideas floating around as a result of meeting in person. So it's great to take a break, and it's great to meet in person because ideas flow from that. And I'm really looking forward to this break. And I also am really looking forward to our new Gender a Wider Lens when we come back in, is it February the 3rd? I think we're coming back.
Yeah, so we are going to be kind of wrapping up this season with this episode. And like you mentioned, we're going to be back on February 3rd. And so during that time, we have a lot of work to do behind the scenes because we plan to bring a lot of updates, a lot of improvements, a lot of changes to the podcast. And we're not going to spill the beans quite yet, but we're really excited for some of the ideas that generated while we were spending time together here in Arizona. And, I'm recognizing how poor we are at self-promotion. I mean, I don't know if that's the right word, but I guess like talking to people about the resources that we have. So I thought we could spend a moment now, telling listeners, if you are going to miss us tremendously and you want to hear our voices or see our faces while we're gone, we have a lot of places you can do that. I think first thing that comes to mind, if you just want to support our work and show appreciation that way, you can certainly join our Patreon, which has a couple of different tiers. You'll have access to transcripts from all the shows, and we also do short 15-minute Q&As, 10 to 15 minutes. So if you like little kind of nuggets that way, it's a manageable way to kind of have questions answered. So for example, we've done Q&As about, parents who want to protect the younger sibling from what's happening with their ROGD kid, or parents who feel estranged from their children and are trying to figure out how to stay connected with their lives. We've been asked about social contagions and psychogenic illness. So we've answered questions like that in short Q&A format.
If you want to hear more, we also have, each of us have a parenting site. You have a Subscribe Star, and I'll let you describe that. And I have a Substack. So it's very easy to find us. If you just Google Stella O'Malley Substack, you'll find it, and vice versa. Sasha Ayad Subscribe Star, you'll find it very easily. And my Substack is, like, I do webinars, and I very much focus on very practical, very specific issues, on the idea of there are some people who are really in the trenches in a specific problem. For example, pronouns and names, social transition, or suicide and self-harm and the gender dysphoric child, or managing anxiety with the gender dysphoric young person. And so I'm very focused around different issues and how parents might be helped. And also, I know I did one that was actually had a huge response, which was body dysmorphia and self-loathing and the gender dysphoric child. And then I do question and answers so that parents can kind of ask questions and, find out specific issues that they want to disclose and, discuss. And I think it's really important that parents have this space to go to. And you have your own. And I was kind of thinking about it, and I bet your vibe is different than mine. And so some parents might say, I think I'll go for a bit of Stella, or no, she's too rough. I'll go over for the more soothing sounds of Sasha. So you've got a choice which way to go. And I think that's a good thing, because I think that will give a nice bit of variety. And you can even test us. You can ask the same questions and see what she says. And I'd imagine we'll come out different and yet slightly similar themes. I'd be very interested, actually, on a blind test. So work away if you want to.
Yeah, for sure. That's very interesting. My Subscribestar used to be a Patreon, and I shifted over to Subscribestar a few years ago. And I've been running it since about 2017 or 18. And what I do is kind of a couple different things. I have monthly topic videos that I make. So I often think about what are the most common questions parents have asked, and I do videos where I kind of delve into that topic. And what I'm working on right now is a series, and it's an attempt to help parents kind of orient themselves to their parenting style and how to respond to their child based on that. So we talk about whether or not you need to lean in, for example, with more conversation or communication with your child, or do you need to actually back up and give your child some space while working on other things like managing internet or helping to broaden their world. So I kind of give parents a couple of strategies to help them figure out where they lie in these different parenting styles and what to do in response. And in addition to that, I run monthly Q&As as well. So parents submit questions ahead of time, and then once a month, we all meet on Zoom. And for about 90 minutes, I just kind of field questions and invite parents to unmute themselves, participate. We kind of talk through the scenario that's going on with their child. And I share my observations and my clinical intuition, as best as I can. So Stella and I both have these platforms where we do kind of parent support and parent coaching. So if you are a parent listening to this and you would like more direct access to us and more kind of practical strategies, I think that's great, because the podcast really focuses on the ideas, the big picture, the philosophy, the psychology. But I think both of our parent coaching websites are focused more on practical application. So feel free to check those out during the break. We'll include those in the show notes. So now I think we can kind of introduce the conversation a bit. So you were contacted by this young man who goes by the pseudonym Teiresias. Tell us just briefly about him, and then of course we'll launch into the discussion.
It's interesting. I was originally contacted by another detransitioner from Holland. And as soon as I was contacted, I was immediately very engaged, because I've been hearing nothing but the Dutch protocol is the gold standard. The Dutch protocol started the concept of puberty blockers and began the concept really of the trans kid. It really began with this study. And it was a study, and we have, like, you could argue that part one of this interview is our interview with De Vries and Steensma, which we had a few months ago, and we very much questioned them deeply about the Dutch protocol. And it was 70 children in 2011, and they led out the study. And the idea was we have the ability to choose these children, so much so that they will not regret medically transitioning as children. And we, the psychologists, have the ability to see into their soul and know what they will like and know what they will be in as adults in the future. And we have the ability to foresee that this is the appropriate road for these people. It feels very authoritarian to me, and it doesn't go with me. It doesn't jive with me at all. However, in 2014, there was a follow-up of this 2011 study. 15 of the children were no longer in the study, and 55 were in the study. and they continued on. And the general idea is that all the social transition, the medical transition, the puberty blockers, all of that is rooted in this study from Holland, this small study from Holland, where I remind you, one person actually died out of those 70. It's not great figures, not great stats are coming out of that, and yet it flew like the wind. It got lifted and it got raised. And until detransitioners contacted us from Holland, I've always been very, very interested to meet anybody and hadn't met anybody. When I met the first detransitioner, I met them and I spoke with them quite extensively for the last few months. And now I met a second detransitioner, and there are other detransitioners from this clinic. And this detransitioner is male. And his story, it's long and it's unfolding as we discuss it. We take our time with it. We decided to take our time with it. We made that decision so that people could get the full view of him.
Yeah, just for context, typically we tell our guests we're going to record for about 50 minutes or an hour, and then we're going to wrap it up. But before we even got on the call with Teiresias, we decided let's just let this young man tell his story in full in whatever way he feels is best. So as the listener, you'll see it's much longer than most of our podcasts. For some other podcasts, this is normal, 2 and 3 hour conversations. But for us, this is long. But we really encourage you to listen carefully, because he's kind of laying out the trajectory of his life and like all of the things in his childhood that contributed to this. What you will discover is this kind of sudden decision that like, wow, medical transition is going to transform my life. And he describes step by step how all of these medical professionals totally failed to catch the red flags, to ask him deep and important questions about his sexuality, about his trauma, about bullying, about divorce, all of these things. So that being said, we encourage you to take a look at the conversation we had with the Dutch researchers, which is episode 66. We'll include it in the show notes. If you've listened to it, great, you can jump right in. But if you haven't, it might be really interesting to listen to them, maybe one after the other. And, I know, Stella, you're really interested in having Michael Biggs on, who's a researcher who's really kind of looked in excruciating detail at the Dutch studies, trying to unpick where does this concept of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones come from? What are we don't have a lot of follow-up data. So of course, these kind of case studies are interesting, but that might be like almost a part 3, I'm imagining, of these 3 episodes about the Dutch. And I imagine as time goes on, more Dutch detransitioners will come out. And just, we want to be really clear, Teiresias was not one of the young people in the study per se, but he was treated at a Dutch clinic, which follows that protocol. So we don't want to kind of misrepresent it. Okay, so I think that's it. Is there anything else you want listeners to know?
No. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. It's long, it's deep, but it's worthwhile listening to. And I hope you all enjoy the break as much as we intend to.
Yes, and we will be back in February with a lot of exciting updates. So enjoy our conversation with Teiresias. Hi, Stella. How are you feeling?
I'm good. How are you? The 99th episode.
Yes.
It feels very important.
It does. It's amazing that we have recorded nearly 100 episodes together, and I couldn't be more thrilled to have our special guest on today. We welcome Teiresias to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
We feel like there are so many valuable things that your story will offer our listeners. And we just want to give you a space to start your story, I guess, from the beginning. Maybe we can start with your childhood. You could tell us a little bit about what you were like as a kid. And then, of course, leading up to how you ended up in the Dutch clinic. So tell us about you as a child.
Yes, of course. So as a child, I was always kind of I didn't really fit in with other children. And I had this happened for like most of elementary school. And I was always a bit more feminine, and I was very sensitive, and I liked dressing up in like dresses and skirts, and I wanted to have long hair, and I liked doing stuff with makeup and all that. And also, I like playing with dolls and like typical, so like stereotypical girl things. But at the same time, I also was interested in more boy toys. So it wasn't like I only had this feminine side. I always had like this kind of double side, I suppose. But um, I I remember telling a lot of people, especially like other children, that I wanted to be a girl, or like, yeah, I would tell other kids that I wanted to be a girl. Um, and my parents also sometimes. But my parents, because this was like late 90s, early 2000s, so in like a very rural part of the Netherlands. So, people didn't exactly knew much about transgender, or like, and also like the medicalization of trans children at that time had only just started, so, or barely started even, so it wasn't really something that was known.
So what year were you born approximately?
um yeah, I was born in like late 90s.
Okay. Okay. So you were one of those kids who just naturally gravitated towards girl toys, girl things. Sometimes you said you wished you'd grow up to be a girl. So this was pretty natural for you. And all of this is kind of happening throughout your childhood, or did this start at a particular age that you felt more drawn to femininity?
No, this was like from as early as I can remember. I remember like in kindergarten, there was there was this dress that I really liked. It was like I think it was like a fairy dress or something, and I wanted to wear that, so I put it on and I wore it, and then I went to like play with, I think it was like cars, or with like machine, like tractors or something. So it was like I had this very like dual side, like both feminine,
Yeah.
both like masculine, I suppose.
How did people respond to your kind of blending of different feminine and masculine activities?
Um, well, very mixed. There were a lot of people that didn't particularly care, um, and my parents, also didn't really care. They just let me do it. They didn't make an issue out of it. Um, they didn't think it was weird or anything, but it did make them think that I was gay. So, which they were right about that. But there were some people, and especially other kids, that thought it was weird. So I was bullied for it, sadly. And sometimes also from like adults, I would get weird reactions, because some adults, like, they didn't want me to play with their kids or be around their kids, because they thought I was like weird and I was gonna influence them or something. I'm not sure, but they reacted weird to me as well.
Yeah.
And I heard you say a couple of things that kind of struck a chord with me. One was that you said along the lines of I was the archetypal trans kid. And the second thing you said, which I thought was very interesting because it resonated with me, was gender dysphoria doesn't really describe the experience of the actively gender nonconforming kid, because when they're so young, I think it's more like they're determined or certain or clear of what they like and what they don't, as opposed to dysphoria. It makes me think of the kids who went to the Zucker clinic who had dysphoria. It makes me think, might they have had other distresses? I certainly had other distresses, but that wasn't the source of my distress. That was just where I was going in life. I don't know. It's just gender dysphoria doesn't seem to really describe the experience. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, definitely. Especially when I was this young, I mean, I had how do you say that? Like, things I didn't like. I had issues, like problems, but I didn't hate being a boy. Like, I knew I was a boy, even though I always had this feeling that it made more sense if I was born a girl, or I always preferred to be a girl. But, and I said that to people also, but I never hated or disliked being a guy. I was just like, yeah, well, I am a guy. So, and it didn't upset me or anything. It was just like, that's what it was. So, it only got upsetting when people told me that because I was a boy, I wasn't allowed to do these things that I wanted to do. That's what upset me. But then as I got older, I also kind of started to learn that people thought that, you know, me being a boy doing these stereotypically feminine, girly things was weird. So I kind of stopped doing it because I didn't want to get bullied, basically. So that's why I stopped doing it eventually.
Society gave you the dysphoria. I remember I did. I don't want to go on about myself, but I just want to clarify. I definitely did not want to be a girl. I think I was a misogynist. I didn't like girls at all. But I know it wasn't the heart-wrenching pain that the teenagers talk about. That's a whole, I suppose that's a more older kids experience. And like you, it made sense that I should be with the boys, just like you thought I should be with the girls. This is where I belong, or something. This is the natural fit, or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I never really felt like and I think that's also very important, which made me identify as trans eventually. I never felt like I fit in anywhere, not with the boys, not with the girls, which is, especially growing up and especially in puberty, that's very distressing. It's very painful.
Did that have something to do with just like your personality or your interests? Like I'm
Yeah.
just thinking about describing that you lived in this very kind of rural part of the country. Um, do you think it was something more just about who you were as a kid that you didn't really fit in? It just seems like it wasn't just gender. It wasn't really about gender per se.
No, it was more with friendships with peers. Other kids my age, because at a certain point I went to the local village school initially, but the bullying there got so bad that my parents eventually sent me to another school in like the nearest city. And when I went there initially, like the first years, things went pretty well, and there I really things got really better with me, and I didn't really my like not, I don't want to say discomfort, but my unhappiness, it went, I'm not it kind of went away because I had friends, and I don't know if I was popular, but I was I had friends to play with, so
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel so lonely.
Mm-hmm.
I think my parents also sent me before they sent me to another school, they sent me to a children's psychologist, and she basically said that there was nothing wrong with me, but I was I was a gifted kid. I was like intelligent, um, and felt very lonely because I had this. Well, I'm not sure if he said that, but looking back, the reason why I felt lonely was because I had this interest, like this weird interest that other kids didn't have. So I remember I was very interested in geography and in history, and other children just weren't. So
Yeah.
yeah.
You sound lovely.
Yeah. You sound like a very sweet kid. Um, and so around what age did you get put in a different school and start making some friends? Around how old?
Honestly, I don't know. I think it was around 7.
Okay.
I have to think. It was like fourth grade. So that's, yeah, 7, 8, something like that.
Okay. So then what happened? So you switch schools, you start making a couple of friends. What's next?
So when I was in that school, it was fine. I still had this kind of interest in like feminine things, and always I remember when we were playing like role playing games, I always took like feminine roles, and at the new school other kids didn't bully me for it. It was kind of, they just let me, I suppose. And I I also remember we had this play thing. It was a bit of a, it was not a regular school. It was a different kind of philosophy. It was a school that followed this kind of different philosophy, and they had these old holidays, which most people don't celebrate, but we celebrated it, and it was quite fun, to be honest. And there was because of one of these holidays. I don't. Maybe you know it. It was Saint Lucia Day. I think they celebrated in Scandinavia a lot, and then I think it was in our case. It was like 5th or 6th grade that then went around all the classes in like costumes to like give out not present but like cake and candy and stuff like that. So and then the girls would dress up as angels and the guys would dress up as gnomes, I remember. And then they wanted me to have like this gnome suit, and I remember telling them I don't want that, I want to be an angel. So, and they let me, they let me, I could be an angel. So but other than that, in like daily life, I didn't really, I was just a boy, I suppose. So I didn't really have this thing that I really wanted to be feminine or anything. It was more in like role playing. But then as I got older, my parents eventually divorced. And still I didn't, it was, for a long time, it was kind of the same. Like I was just a guy, I suppose, like a boy. Eventually I did want to grow out my hair longer, but other than that, there was nothing unusual about me, I suppose.
Could I ask, had anybody said anything about being gay, or had that been brought up, or was
Yeah.
that anywhere in the air? Like,
Yeah. So it was a bit of a bit of a weird story, but I realized that I was gay very early. I think because I also hit puberty very early. I think around the time my parents divorced, I was 10. And that's when I noticed that things were starting, or like 10, 9, something like that. And that's also the same time when I kind of realized that I was attracted to other boys, and that kind of freaked me out because initially I was neutral about it because my parents, they were always kind of open-minded about it, so I knew that it was a thing and I knew that it existed. So I remember, I think I told my mother, and she was okay. Like she didn't, she probably saw it coming. But then later I also told other kids in my school, and they didn't really react very well. So and I didn't got bullied like initially, but when my parents divorced, I got bullied again, and they also kind of bullied me with like being gay because I had told them. So other people had, like, they told other people, so everyone know that I had said that I thought I was gay. But obviously, as soon as they started bullying with me, I kind of denied it. I was like, no, that was just a phase, or I was just, So I guess I kind of went back into the closet. And that the time when I got bullied again was around the same time my parents divorced, and I'm not sure exactly why. I think it was just because my parents divorced, so at home it was like messy because my parents divorce was very, very problematic, very messy. So I was just an easy target, I suppose, because also I was always different. So I think that's why they bullied me.
Or are you an only child?
No, I have an older sister.
Okay.
But she, maybe that had something to do with it as well. By the time that I started getting bullied again at the new school, my sister had gone to high school. because
So you were alone.
yeah. So whereas before my sister sometimes would kind of it's like protect me, I suppose. Like when someone picked on me, she would like pick on them. So because she was older.
So you were kind of like in an exceptionally vulnerable place. Your parents are getting this very complicated divorce. You kind of came out of the closet and then popped back in. And your sister's gone, so you're kind of alone.
Yeah,
And you were what, around 10 at that time?
yeah, yeah. 10.
Sounds difficult. So
Yeah.
so then what happened?
Um, I mean the bullying. I mean it was bad, but it wasn't. It didn't last very long. It was just for I think 1 year, and then later it kind of stopped again. Also, again, I'm not sure exactly why. Oh well, maybe because I hit puberty so early and I got taller than everyone, so maybe that's why. But so and then like last year of elementary school, I hated it, but not because I was bullied. I hated it because I remember thinking that the teachers were treating us so childishly, and I was looking forward to going to high school and all that, but not because it was necessarily like a horrible period.
So part of you was like ready to grow up. Like, I want to be treated like a mature adult that I am.
Yeah, I suppose I oh it was kind of weird because and I like all this time I still kind of had this interest in like being a woman, and I really suppressed like this feminine side of me ever since I got
Hmm.
beat again for it. And I remember when I went to high school, I really wanted to be very masculine and like go like I did a lot of sports and I worked like really wanted to like be because I was very tall also, so I really wanted to be like big, I suppose. And I went on. I did martial arts a lot, which I also really liked. I still like. Um, so again, and again, I didn't hate those things. You would say that's like stereotypically masculine. I didn't hate it, but at the same time, I also had this feminine interest, but I suppressed it a lot. And because I thought I have to do this in order to like I wanted to do everything in order not to get bullied again. Um, and when puberty started, initially I was kind of excited about it. Um, because I was like, oh, multiple reasons. Not necessarily because I thought I was becoming an adult, but I thought it was also going to, um, like my attraction to guys would like or boys like would go over. I thought like, oh, puberty is going to make me straight. Like puberty is going to make me a man, and then I'm going to be attracted to women. Obviously, that didn't happen. um, but I thought that was going to happen. So I was excited about that, and I wanted that to happen. But also, like these physical changes initially, I didn't hate them because the changes that I got initially were the ones that I was kind of excited about, like getting taller, getting bigger, having a deeper voice. The thing that freaked me out though was body hair. I hated that. Um, but other than that, not really. But later in puberty, then I got like other stuff that really freaked me out. So that's when like the real discomfort started, and also because that's when things went much more downhill with me, like mentally, which is also related to like family issues.
Could I ask? I think body hair often really seems to hit teenage boys really quite badly. Just like with the girls, the periods and breasts seem to really hit them. It feels very like body dysmorphia in a way,
Yeah.
certainly. And you said other stuff. Was it similar to that, like body hair and things like that? Is it?
Yeah, well, sexuality really freaked me out. Like I don't want to go into like TMI space here, but just male and female sexuality are very different. That's not a surprise to anyone, probably, but like men, there's this stereotype that men are much more like aggressive in a way, that like male sexuality is much more about like is much more physical and much more aggressive, I suppose. And I definitely noticed that. And also, it's not something you can, or at least I couldn't turn it off. It was like the more I tried to not think about it, or like the more I tried to suppress it, the harder it got, because I could not, like, which is normal for guys and men, I suppose. But it freaked me out. It made me feel like very like an animal, or like
Yeah.
primal.
I think this is common. I mean, males who are just experiencing that for the first time, it does feel like this powerful force that takes over their body and they feel out of control. And I think it's very scary. I mean, I think some boys figure out how to embrace it, and maybe those are the boys that are a little bit more crass and they're kind of like out there hitting on people or whatever. But I think the sensitive boys often experience this as a terrifying experience.
Yeah, definitely. And also, for me, what played a role was that I was attracted to other guys and to men, which I really didn't want. So I kind of put on this. It was so. Oh, if I think back on it, it's so cringy. But I really try to become this very. I try to mimic other men, and like how they talked about women, and like especially like straight men and straight boys, and it was this very kind of objectifying way of talking about women, and it was really. But I did that to hide that I was attracted to guys.
I've heard boys and men talk about this kind of drive that happens to them in those years, and I heard one guy saying, it was like being strapped to a beast that I frankly didn't want to be strapped to. I think we underestimate that as females. We have our own issues that we're kind of confronted with in adolescence, but this runaway train, this kind of the beast of testosterone, it does feel like a burden for some people.
And then I think if you're gay, that really complicates the process even more, because you're trying to hide all of this. Whereas like a straight boy, probably he and his friends, talk about this stuff and he feels like, okay, I'm not the only one. But then, with you being attracted to other boys, you're trying to hide it, you're overcompensating. I mean, how confusing. That seems so confusing.
Yeah, definitely. And also, because I remember I remember I tried to like have myself feeling attracted to girls or to women, but I just couldn't. And it freaked me out.
So at this point, you have not, based on I think what you're saying here, you have not really heard of transition, becoming transgender, medical interventions. You haven't heard of this stuff at this point.
I had heard about it.
Okay.
There was a trans person in my high school, and I'm not sure if they actually went on medical transition eventually, but they presented as the other gender.
Were they kind of female to male or male to female?
Female to male. So I knew it was a thing, and also, at the time, especially, there were jokes about it. Like in the media, you would hear about, like, especially male to female trans people. They were, always kind of ridiculed, which is, kind of a bad thing, I think. But it happened. So I had seen it on television, so I knew that it was a thing, but I didn't, we would always call them like like a slur I don't think I should say on here, but that's what I thought was like the appropriate term back then, because that's what everybody called them. But other than that, I didn't really knew about it. I had not heard about, like, I had heard about people who were born as guys that then transitioned into women. But I hadn't heard this thing of like, oh, they were unhappy and then they became happy because they transitioned. I hadn't heard that. And also at that time, because this was when I was, I think, 12, 13, I don't want to say I was happy, but the unhappiness was not that bad. And it also wasn't, the unhappiness that I had, I didn't project it on my gender, if that makes sense. And I eventually that happened when I was like later, when I got older. But like a lot of stuff happened in like prelude to that, and I have to think. So eventually I, because this was in like first year of high school, and I kind of tried to be this really masculine person, which is funny because that's completely not what I am. But so and I had friends that I hung out with, but then came the second year, and things got more complicated also at home because the divorce was, even though the divorce was still already like, I think my parents had divorced for a few years at that time, but it was still difficult, and it was still going on, and like because I also have an older sister, so like things involving us especially got very complicated. And so at home it became very messy, and also this friend group that I used to have, I kind of stopped seeing them because we kind of grew apart. Like they went to another school. They were from elementary school that I knew them from, but they went to another high school, and initially we kind of kept seeing each other, but they had other friends and other interests, so they kind of just went away. And then I had this friend group from my high school that I hung out with, but they kind of left. Like two of them, there were three guys. Two of them left to like another. Well, one left to another country, one to another school, and then one kind of also stopped hanging out with me. And like all that happened at the same time, and that's when I kind of got crazy, I suppose, because I really got very depressed, and I really felt very lonely again, and I really felt very, I was thinking stuff to myself that it was useless to try to make contact with other people, because sooner or later they would like abandon me anyway, or like that I couldn't trust people because sooner or later they would like use things against me. Um, so so I really started, like at this period I really started to isolate, and this is also the period when other things with puberty started happening. So I remember I got acne, which I hated, and I got more body hair, which I also really hated. And but so yeah, I started to isolate a lot, and most of my existence was online. And I had this friend group that I, from like sports, from martial arts that I did, which I could get along with them, but I didn't see them a lot outside of the like regular training. So other than that, I really didn't have like a lot of people to hang out with. So most of the people I talked to were online, and most of them were also gay boys about the same time with about the same interests as I had. So it was nice talking to them, but I'm not sure exactly what it was. I just really, even though I was talking, I found people that were also gay and kind of closeted, well, very closeted. I still just didn't, it, it's, it gave me this feeling that, I'm not, there's more people like me, but still I just didn't want to be gay. Like still I it didn't give me this feeling like, oh, I'm not alone, or like I'm there's nothing wrong with it. I still just really didn't want to be gay. So, as these things progressed, I also kind of developed this idea that if I was born a girl, then things would have been so much easier, because also from what I could tell at high school, and I'm not sure if this, I mean, it's probably wrong, but from what I could tell was that girls had an easier time like socializing than boys, and also that was what I was gathered at that time. And again, like probably it's not true, but and also the way that boys socialize with each other, teen boys, I hated that because it's very competitive, and I never wanted to engage in that, but I felt like every time I was kind of dragged into it, and I just hated all of that, and I didn't want to have anything to do with it. So the people that I hung out with were mostly girls after that. But I always kind of sensed this feeling from girls that even though they like got along with me or they liked me, they kind of kept their distance because they didn't want to give like wrong impressions to me. Like they didn't want to give me the impression that they were into me or anything. So I always felt this kind of distance from them, and I started thinking like, oh, if I was a girl, this wouldn't happen, and I also could just be attracted to guys, and that wouldn't be a problem. And also, I would have this, because all this time, for years at this point, this feminine side of me, I had suppressed like very much, and I also started thinking like, oh, if I was a girl, I didn't have to suppress that. So I just gathered that it would be so much easier for me if I was born a girl. So I started having this desire to be a girl, but still I didn't think about transitioning because still at this point I hadn't heard the connection between transitioning and like solving problems or solving unhappiness, basically. That happened when I was 16, because I was watching TV, and then there was this talk show where they had a trans man talking, who was also a teenager at that time. He was a few years younger than I was at the time. I think he was like, I don't know, 13, 14, and I was 16. And he talked about that he was very depressed and he didn't like being a girl, and especially when puberty hit. And then he kind of transitioned to a boy, and like things are so much better now. And then I started thinking, this sounds very similar to me. So I started Googling it online, and I found all these websites, mostly from America, where people would just say like how to know that you're trans, and you would get this like checklist of like symptoms or whatever. So I looked stories from other trans people up. This was also 2000 and I think 2015. So I had all these stories of people that they had become so happy and things were so great, and especially trans, because obviously I was looking mostly at trans women. And when I saw that, and also because all of them told about having these feminine feelings ever since they were a kid, and having these feminine interests. So when I heard those things, I was like, oh, this makes so much sense. Like this must be me, And also because I was so unhappy, I really wanted to do like, that's when I started to really want to transition, because I thought like, this is it. If I don't do this, then I'm going to be miserable for the rest of my life. I think what is also important to tell here is that at this point, for like the months before I think it was a year at this point before I found found out about trans, I was looking for other stuff to kind of explain what was wrong with me, because I was at this time I was like very convinced that something was wrong with me, and there was something that I had to fix. because I was so unhappy. So then, and because I felt hated by everyone. So I thought there must be something that is wrong with me. I remember before I identified myself as trans, I never went to a therapist. My mother, she really wanted to get me to talk to a therapist, but I didn't want to because, again, I had this idea that I couldn't trust anyone. So I self-diagnosed with, I think it was autism. Oh no, I think the first thing I came across was bipolar disorder, and then it was autism, and then borderline, and then I don't know, like all this diagnosis that I just found out online, and then I would kind of fixate on them, and I was like, oh, this is me, you know, like this is what this explains me, but then after a few weeks it would fade away because it didn't really make a lot of sense, and then and that's what I continued to do for a couple of months, and then I found out about trans, and trans like really had an answer. You needed to transition, and then it was all great. So that was the one that sticked. And then I became very focused on pursuing transition.
So because trans as an identity, unlike autism or borderline, because it had a concrete set of steps that you can do, there's something very appealing to you about that. Because you were in this kind of dark hole and you're like, well, I don't know what to do. Even if I have autism, there's no particular thing you do with autism that fixes everything.
Exactly.
And then, you came across these stories like, I was depressed, then I transitioned, now I'm happy. Like this very simple formula almost.
Yeah, exactly. And what was also important was that, and this, looking back, I feel very stupid for not seeing this, but before I found out about trans, I hated my body. I hated looking at it, and I thought it was disgusting, but I could never pinpoint what it was. I just didn't like it. But then I found out about trans, then it was the masculine thing. So then it was my brow bone, and then it was my shoulders, and then it was my big feet, and then it was my genitals, and whereas before it was never like that particular. It was just I didn't like it, but no idea why.
You were given an opportunity to blame something.
This is really God, this comes up a lot because I often work with parents whose kids have come out as trans, and they will ask their kids questions, and the kids will say stuff like, well, I hate how big my hands are, or I hate how small my feet are, or whatever. And the parents are like trying to understand, where is this coming from? Like, this feels so random.
Yeah.
But I think what you're describing is like, when we have something to focus on, we divert our depression, our sadness, our distress into particular things. It's like the same as a body dysmorphia. If I got really fixated on like the shape of my eyebrow or something, like that could become the obsession.
It's a coping mechanism.
Exactly.
You can channel it all on one thing, and then it doesn't feel chaotically wrong. It feels clearly wrong.
Exactly.
And then the next point is, and it's fixable. So it's not only that it's clearly this is the problem, so that calms the kind of chaotic mind. It's like, and it comes with a framework of, now I know what's wrong with life. Now I know how it needs to be fixed. Can we now get the fix in? Such a false promise.
Exactly. And now we're kind of fast forwarding to later when I was transitioning already, because that was when I did things about it. I went on hormones. I had facial feminization surgery. So I fixed these things that I hated about myself. But especially after facial feminization surgery, I realized it didn't fix anything. It just moved it. Because, I hated my face, so I had this surgery. And then I didn't hate my face anymore, but then I fixated on my shoulders, and then I fixated on my hips, and then that was the problem. And then I wanted to do something about that. And then I realized, like, what am I doing? I realized that there was never going to be a point where I was going to be happy with myself, because it didn't fix anything. It just moved the problem to another part.
And it could then go into, voice, and it can go everywhere. It can go everywhere. So could you tell us your experience of your, the clinic, the Dutch clinic, which has always been held up. Oh, sorry, am I jumping ahead?
Yeah, no, you're right. How did you end up at the clinic? Because of course you're starting to get distressed. You're starting to fantasize about transition or becoming a woman. Yeah, let's connect those dots. That's really important.
I want to remind listeners that the Dutch clinic are always held up as, the gold standard, the clinic that does it right, the clinic that brought us the concept of the trans kid, the clinic that brought us the concept of puberty blockers, all on the basis of effectively a study of 70 children. And, there were issues with that, and we've gone into that before. But it's always held up as this great, brilliant gold standard. And if only the other clinics were following that, maybe we would have had some luck. And your narrative, and may I say other narratives, I've spoken to other detransitioners from Holland, are telling a very different story.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I definitely think it's important to go into there. So when I was looking on the internet, and I was like, oh shit, I'm trans, and I thought this all made so much sense to me. I told my mother very quickly, even though I had struggled for years, my whole puberty, with my sexuality, and I was like, I'm taking this to my grave, like I'm never gonna tell this to anyone, even though my mother knew. But coming out as trans was not that was like really not that much of a problem for me, because I told my mother within a couple of months. I think 3-4 months later, I told my mother. And the reason why was because of, obviously, I had looked for like other trans communities, like online trans communities and chats and stuff like that. And I would talk to other trans people, and most of them were older. Most of them were trans women that had transitioned like older, when in their 30s or 40s or 50s. And they told me that I needed to transition very early, because I was still young and I still could prevent things from puberty. So I needed to get on blockers very soon, because then otherwise I was going to regret it for the rest of my life. Because I would get like changes done to my body that I could never reverse. Which honestly was kind of bullshit, because at that time, the things that were unchangeable, like bone structure and height, and it didn't, because I hit puberty so early, it hadn't changed that much, like me compared to now. Then when I was 16, it's not like that much of a difference, to be honest. But anyway, so that really messed me up, because that really made me like very desperate to get on these hormones. So that's why I was so quick on telling people, even though when it came to like being gay, I was struggling with that forever. So and also because there was this future, I'm not sure how to call it, like a future image of myself, where I was like, okay, yeah, this period is going to be difficult, but in the end it's going to be worth it. So I'm just going to be like a straight woman, basically. Whereas if I came out as gay, then I would be a gay man, which was a thing I didn't want.
This future woman in your mind, did you have a picture of somebody kind of fabulous, or was it vaguer than that?
No, I had a picture of what I wanted to look like and how I wanted to be, which was completely unrealistic, which I really wanted to pursue, but obviously it was never gonna happen, because
And did they explore that? Sorry, did they explore that in the clinic? Sorry for jumping in on you.
Well, yeah, but not very much in depth. So okay, when I told my mother that I was trans, she was very surprised, because she expected me to tell her I was gay, and then I told her I was trans. So she was kind of, didn't know what to think, didn't know what to do. So she started looking on the internet about where she could, if there was a place that could help me with this. And then she found out that the gender clinic has also therapists that work there that are specialized in gender. So she thought, okay, well, there, if anyone knows how to deal with this, it's going to be them. So she sent me there thinking that they would know what they're doing, but spoiler alert, they don't. So I had my intake at that time. Like, the waiting lists right now are absolutely crazy. I think they're at this point almost 3 years, or maybe even past 3 years. But at the time they were much shorter. And I think it was 3. I think it was, I'm not sure, 6 months, 3 months, 6 months, something between that. So by the time I saw them was like late 2015, it must have been, so around the winter. That's when I had my intake. And they were kind of general, and my mother was there in the intake as well, and then later one appointment as well. And my mother was very clear that she did not see this, and she didn't think I was trans, and she also expressed her concerns that it was related to other things like my sexuality and the divorce with my parents, and my family situation, and that I was bullied, and that I was lonely, and that I also had a bad relationship with my father, because that's probably also important to say, to give more of a background. But they never really listened to her. I think they told her something like, they tried to like comfort her. I'm not sure if that's the right term.
Yeah, consoler, yeah.
Yeah. So they would tell her that they worked very carefully and very there was this assessment and this long process that I would have to go through, and they would explore my past and all that. And if there was something else going on that was, other than me being trans, they would figure that out along the process. But then they diagnosed me after 4 or 5 appointments over the course of 2 months, which, given that I had such a complex past, is ridiculous, I think.
And they considered themselves and were considered the world leaders.
Yeah, so I went to the gender clinic in another city, the one closest to there were, I think at that time there were 2 gender clinics, the Groningen and Amsterdam, and I went to the one in Groningen. But they did only the therapeutical part of the transition, and after that they would have to send me to the Amsterdam clinic for the medical part. So, because there were different phases during the transition process. The first one was the I'm not sure how to translate it properly, but diagnostic phase, I suppose.
Yeah.
So they would look for the diagnosis, but that one for me was only 4 or 5 appointments, and then I got the diagnosis, and then they referred me to the Amsterdam clinic for the second phase, and I'm not sure how to call that. But it basically is more of a preparation for transition, and the questioning is pretty much out of the what they do. They barely question, and they barely explore anything.
Do you remember?
They only
Sorry, I want to get to the medical portion or the preparation portion, but I want to ask you before we move forward. Do you remember in the course of those 4 or 5 sessions during the diagnostic phase, do you remember any line of questioning or any exploration that you, in hindsight, think, well, they should have spent more time on that? Or like, there was a lot they missed, obviously, right? So Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So the initial phase was they didn't really go into, well, they didn't go into depth at all. It was more kind of, they stayed kind of on the surface. They didn't really go into depth. And I do recall that they asked me stuff like, well, how do you know you're not gay? And then I just answered with stupid stereotypes, and that, could have, that really don't say anything. And they just believed it. I think, um, I think one of the things I told them was like, yeah, but when I see a gay man, I don't feel like that's me, or I don't feel like I don't feel like gay men represent me or something, or I don't identify with them, which is ridiculous because obviously if you have internalized homophobia, that's what you feel. You're not going to feel that. So, but they just believe that. But honestly, I don't remember too much about the details of like this initial process. So when I went to Amsterdam, I had to wait again for a couple of months. And in the meantime, I had graduated from high school, and I went to uni. So I also moved to another city, and I was so happy that I left high school because I hated high school. And then I started the appointments with the gender clinic in Amsterdam, and they basically copied, or like not copied, but like they took the diagnostics from the Groningen gender clinic. And my mother says, and I'm not sure, I don't remember this exactly, but my mother says that they said that in Groningen they just do the diagnosis, and in Amsterdam they're going to further question that diagnosis, or further like see what is. No, wait, now that I'm talking about it, they also told me, yeah, I remember that. They told me at the last appointment I had with them that, yeah, you have the diagnosis now, and now in Amsterdam they're going to look if what the best treatment for it is, or what to do about it and where it comes from, or something like that. But then I went to Amsterdam, and all they did was affirm, and all they could, like, the only treatment they ever talked about was medical, and never they never talked to me about, maybe you can fix your distress with like therapy. They never talked about that. It was really just preparing for the medical stuff.
And you had difficulties with your father, and you had internalized homophobia, and they didn't discuss this.
Very little. I think especially the internalized homophobia part, they didn't even talk about that really. At least I don't remember they did. So it probably, even if they did, it probably didn't mean much.
Because I've met you, and well, by Zoom, how we all meet, and some people you could kind of see quite quickly they seem gay, just probably be shot for that. But you do. I just can't believe you went to a clinic and they didn't just think this guy's gay.
Yeah, well, I suppose they look at like stereotypical things. So if as a man you're a bit effeminate, they're gonna read that as being trans.
Yeah.
Right. And actually the more according to, that kind of way of being, the more quote gay you are, the more trans they believe you are, right? Like to them, that's
Yeah.
proof of how super, super trans somebody is, I think.
I know. But some people are so gay. It's just how did this happen?
Okay, so you get there and really you realize that in fact they are just preparing you for the medical transition part. Can you talk about some of your experiences with the medical staff there? Because I think you had some very profound and kind of disturbing experiences. Can you share some more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So I didn't start medication initially. I think I was there for a year before I started. No, 1.5 year, I think, even before I started hormones. And the reason why it took so long was because you're not I'm not sure how it is back now, because I think they changed their protocols. But back then, when I was there, the protocol was that you have to go through this real life phase, basically. And this real life phase basically means you have to live life as the preferred gender. So you have to wear clothes of the preferred gender and express yourself as the preferred gender and go by your new name and all that. And I didn't really do that. And that was something that we talked about a lot, because they were questioning, why aren't you doing this? Because it's needed. And the reason why I didn't do it was because I was scared for the reaction of other people on the one hand, but also because whenever, and I literally told them this, I told them, when I dress up in female clothes, I feel like a man in a dress, and that makes me feel even worse. So I'd rather just be a guy then. And when I think about that now, that's a very, very obvious red flag. The words literally, I would rather just be a guy then. But they didn't think it was important, apparently.
We hope you're enjoying this episode of our podcast. We work very hard to maintain high quality content for this show, and we're grateful to Rhyme and GenSpect for supporting us.
Rhyme, or Rethink Identity Medicine Ethics, is a non-profit organisation dedicated to improving long-term care for gender-variant individuals. Visit rethinkime.org to learn more.
And GenSpect is an international alliance of parents and professional groups whose aim is to advocate for parents of gender-questioning children and young people.
If you'd like to become a patron, you'll have access to weekly transcripts and special Q&As, and you can join our listener community.
Now back to the show. So, sorry, I just want to make sure I understand. So there's this supposed standard of like for 1 year, the individual is supposed to live in the opposite gender role. And they knew that you weren't doing it, and they kept kind of asking you, please do it, or encouraging you to do it. And your hesitation, I would imagine that would be an indicator of a red flag. But you're saying they just kept sticking with the same time course, even though you were not doing the living in the other gender?
Well, they tried to get me to do it. They wanted me. It was like they wanted me to do it. Or the therapist that I was seeing, but I had very low self-esteem. I had very low confidence, so I didn't do it. And also, like I said, it made me feel more uncomfortable than just wearing guy clothes. And we talked also about confidence and self-acceptance also. But never, I don't remember this, to be honest. I don't remember that we talked about this. But fast forwarding to last year when I was detransitioning and I went back because I wanted to hear from them why they didn't do certain things and why they did it so badly. They said that we did talk about self-acceptance, and then they basically said something like... they realized that I had very low self-esteem, and they were questioning whether there would ever be a point where I would accept myself. And then I got really angry because I was just like, how can you give a teenager, at that time I was 18 already, but still teenager, how can you give a teenager like hormones and sign them up for surgeries if you think that self-acceptance is such a... if you're worried whether they're ever going to accept themselves, if you realize that self-acceptance and like confidence is such a big thing, how can you do that? It's ridiculous.
So there were you in your early 20s teaching them the basics of what they would have learned in their first class of psychology or psychiatry.
I mean, I tried to teach them that, but they didn't listen, but we'll get to that later, I'm sure. So because I didn't have the confidence to make the switch to like present as female, they and like I told you, they wanted me. It's almost like they wanted me to transition or like make the switch rather than really explore what was going on. they even told me they approved me for starting hormones, even though I had not done the real life phase. And they said literally to me that the reason why they gave it to me is because they hope that this is going to give me more self-esteem to make the switch. Which is when I mean, obviously at the time I was happy because that was the thing I wanted. But when I look at it like now, in hindsight, now that I'm older, now that I'm an adult, I'm just thinking, how can you be this stupid? How can you be this incompetent? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So they thought they could give you a little nudge towards transitioning by giving you the hormones.
They literally called it a present. They literally told me like, yeah, this is a little present from us.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And at this time I was late 18, so legally I was an adult, but not like when you turn 18 you're instantly an adult and not a child anymore.
Yeah.
And I know that you had quite a lot of surgical procedure. I think you did. Could you tell us how did the hormones impact, and when did you move on to the surgical procedures? How did that all go?
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is also something that I'm quite, angry about, because at the beginning I talked to them, I only wanted hormones and vaginoplasty, and maybe depending on how much breast growth the hormones were going to give me, I wanted breast implants or like a breast augmentation. I eventually opted out of breast augmentation because I found out like the complications with implants and like breast how do you call it, like breast implant illness or something, of like women getting these really weird symptoms after they got an augmentation. So I didn't do that eventually because I was scared for that. um, but I didn't want any other surgeries. But then I went on hormones, and I went on them thinking they were going to change so many things. Also because that's what they told me. They told me, because passing was very important to me, and they realized that I was passing was, looking back, I think if they had asked me what would you do if you weren't able to pass, which they didn't, as far as I know, I probably would have said, at least if I was being honest, I would have said, if I'm not able to pass, then I don't see a point in doing all of this, because passing was that important to me. I didn't want to be a trans woman. I wanted to be a woman, and the trans woman was the closest I could get to it. So I just went for that, I suppose. But they kept telling me not to worry about that because I didn't look so masculine, and that, thinking about it now, was ridiculous because I'm quite tall. My feet size is quite big. My hands aren't that big, but my shoulders are broad, and I also, in my face, had like very heavy brow bone, so there was no way that I was going to be passable from just hormones. But they kept telling me like, oh, you don't look that masculine at all. You look quite feminine from yourself, which is just not true. So I'm not sure why they said that. I think they just want to be nice, but they don't realize that with that they are not really helping me.
Another little present, just like keep the fantasy alive.
That's really, yeah. I think that um, they just. I don't think they like really want to hurt people. That's really not what I think. I think they just want to be nice, and they think that this is making people feel better because people like hearing this. So it's so they think like, that's probably good for them then. But you're not really helping people with that. You're just. I had this delusion, and they just sent me deeper into it. They just fed it. So because of that, I went on hormones thinking it was going to change everything, but obviously that was disappointing. In the beginning, it was. I liked the physical changes that it gave me because it got rid of my acne and it got rid of my body hair. Um, so initially, I was happy with the physical changes. Now I was an emotional wreck because the HRT, it was like a roller coaster of emotions, and it actually made me suicidal. Um, whereas before, I thought about suicide, but it was just a thought. It would go away after an instant. But when I went on hormones, it was like really thinking about it because I just felt very bad. And they would just tell me like, "Oh yeah, but that's normal. That goes away eventually. It resolves." Which again, ridiculous. And it is true though. Like eventually, it did kind of stabilize, and my emotions they did get more stable. But I never got not depressed. I stayed depressed. And then also after a few months, I started gaining a ton of weight, and then I also felt shit about myself physically.
And that weight gain, is that to do with estrogen or what do you
Yeah.
think? Yeah.
Yeah, I think definitely estrogen. Um, and I also started to notice that I didn't, pass as well as I had hoped for. So that's when I started to think like, oh, I need to have surgery for this. That's when I thought I need to have facial feminization surgery, and I talked to them about that, and they didn't really question it. They did shortly try to talk me out of it because they were again like, oh, but you don't look masculine, you look very feminine, like you don't need to do that. But I wasn't. I mean, I feel like in some ways I felt like I was really stupid, but I wasn't stupid in that regard. I realized I wasn't passable, so I just wanted to have the surgeries because I hoped that it was gonna make me more passable. So I didn't really listen to them, but they never really questioned. They only told me like, "Oh, you don't need it," and why do you want this? But they never questioned it. They never looked into. So first I was very clear about not wanting it, and then I was very clear about wanting it, and they never questioned like what happened here. They never looked into that. It was just, and that's basically how they work. It's like if you have the diagnosis and once you've started hormones, you can just pick whatever procedure you want. It's just they're not going to stop you. It's just even if they don't agree with it, they are going to refer you. um, It's like a menu and you can just pick what you want, basically. It's ridiculous.
Well, at that point, it's just cosmetic enhancement, right? So,
Exactly.
because I guess, like, according to their framework, because you're on the hormones, you're already transitioning to woman. Therefore, if you were a cis woman and she said, I'm thinking of getting a nose job, nobody's going to try to stop her. Like, nobody psychologically evaluates a woman who wants a nose
Okay.
job. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's the thinking.
Yeah. Even though I think they should,
Yeah,
because
yeah, for
there's a
sure.
very big chance it's body dysmorphia, and for me it definitely was body dysmorphia. So um the answer was not getting the surgery, the answer was therapy.
Because the needle kept moving, like the standard of how
Exactly.
to be happy just kept shifting. You weren't finding it.
Exactly. Yeah, the milestone keeps shifting, keeps moving. So um So then I had it. They referred me, and I first went. Oh God! So I first went to Bart van de Ven in Antwerp for a consultation, and I was immediately. I kind of felt like, yeah, no, I do not want to be operated by him because he just gave me very creepy vibes. Because he proposed things to me that he was nice, but I remember when I sat in his office and he asked me to sit on this chair, and he was looking at my face, and he literally took out um not a measuring tape, but like a measuring
Ruler?
ruler, and he would like really measure my face, and then he would say like, oh, this we can change by 1 centimeter and this by so many millimeters. So I really felt like he wanted to make me like some sort of doll as like a standard product, which I hated. So I didn't go with him, and he also proposed things to me that I felt like weren't even safe. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a surgeon, but I'm studying, anatomy, something related to anatomy. So I know what the skull looks like, thank God. And apart from like the brow bone, because my brow bone was very heavy, he said that my forehead was kind of protruding, so he wanted to shave that back as well. But that's like the frontal bone. So with the brow bone, if you shave that back, behind it you have a cavity, the frontal cavity, the frontal sinus, and they basically just close that and they make it smooth. But above that, there is no cavity. Like directly underneath that is the brain. But he wanted to also shave that down, and he said like, "Oh no, it's very safe, you know." And he like, I don't know, he talked about how the bone is. I'm gonna try to make it not too technical, but how the bone is like shaped and how it works and all that. So he said he could basically like make the frontal bone thinner. But I just thought to myself, like, do people do this? Is it done by other surgeons? Is this even safe? So, and then I looked for it online and I couldn't find any information about any procedure like this. So then I kind of thought, yeah, no, I'm not doing this.
So it seemed like, I know we're none of us are surgeons, but just, I mean, you can Google anything these days. You can find something, a website on anything, but you're saying even with a Google search, you couldn't find this procedure that he was suggesting or saying is an option.
No, but I think because I also talked to other people who he operated on. Some of them are detransitioned, some of them are not. And a lot of people hate him. A lot of people who were operated by him, they really hate him because they say that he experimented on them. He just tried these ridiculous new methods that are not like no one else does, are not really tested, are not really safe, and he just does it on his patients without permission. So thank God I didn't go to him. So I went looking for another one, and I heard there was one in the Cancer Clinic in Amsterdam itself. So I went to that surgeon, and that was she was a woman, and she really seemed, at the first consultation, she seemed really nice. And also I heard a lot. I remember I looked for the entire internet and I could not find one single negative review about her. Everyone was she was so amazing and so great, and she had so much knowledge about this and whatever. So I went to her, and with the consultation, she also seemed really nice. So and she was really like selling me this talks of like she really she couldn't make like a lot of promises because every face is different and every face needs a different approach, and like she really has a good feeling for what is natural and what looks good on every face and whatnot. So yeah, that, and I fell for it, sadly. So I had the surgery with her, and then she so initially I was very clear about it. I did not want anything done to my nose. My nose was very big. I never had an issue with it. I mean, yeah, it was big, but there's tons of women who have big noses. So I women in my family, for example. So I didn't feel like that was something that really made me masculine. But she kept insisting on doing something about it, and then eventually she said something like, "Oh, but it isn't possible otherwise." And I thought, when she said that, I thought like, "Oh, it's not possible physically otherwise." So that's how she got me to sign the papers eventually. But I remember telling her that, looks wise, I don't want much to change. I told her like, change as little as possible because I don't want another nose. And I also I asked about like complications. For example, I also had an Adam's apple reduction. And I asked about my voice because I had done vocal training to have more of a feminine voice. And that to me was more important than having my Adam's apple shaven down. But she was like, yeah, no, Adam's apple reduction is a simple procedure and there's very little risk, so don't worry. So I bought it and I went for that as well. And obviously the forehead recontouring, which I also had questions about, for example, if it would influence my eyesight, and she said it didn't. So yeah, I had the surgery, and then after that, I noticed I learned the hard way that I had a lot of complications, and also I told her I didn't want a new nose, but she changed literally everything that she could about my nose. Like it was before it was really big, and now it was really small, and it was the exact result that I told her I did not want. It looked very fake. It was very tiny. Nobody had a nose like that naturally. It was very clearly operated. And most importantly, it didn't function. I couldn't breathe properly, so I had to take a revision, and I had a revision not too long ago. And it went well, so I can breathe again, so I'm very happy about that. But I was very pissed at her. I'm very pissed at her, obviously. And I also noticed that my voice had changed. My voice had gotten deeper, which obviously I did not want at the time. Given that I'm detransitioned now, it's not a big of an issue anymore, thankfully. But I can't sing anymore because my upper vocal range is just gone. When I try to reach it, there's just no sound coming out.
And you weren't that bothered about, your Adam's apple. You had said it wasn't a big deal, and you were bothered about your voice. I just want to reiterate, I know you've said it, but it feels egregious that actually your voice came out different. That whole story was shocking.
Yeah. And they actually did look into what was causing it, and I went to she referred me to another doctor, and he used this small camera, which was also kind of small side story. But when I was there, he tried this camera and to look into my throat, to look into my vocal cords, how they were looking, and he needed to go through my nose to do that. And one nostril was made so tiny that this camera, which is tiny, didn't even fit in. So he had to use the other one. So that's how tiny she made it. And he kind of found out that it has probably something to do with the what's it called? Scarring tissue that was kind of deforming my larynx, and that was kind of messing up the shape of my vocal cords. But it was fixable through surgery. But still, I was kind of I haven't done that surgery, and I probably also never will, because I don't think it's that necessary, and I'm just not a fan of surgeries anymore. And obviously, after that experience, I hope I never have to do a surgery ever again. So I don't think I will ever do it, but I'll just live with it.
Can I ask a timeline question? So, in terms of the course of time in which all these procedures happened, you get on hormones. How long after you start hormones did the first surgery happen? And then how long did all these surgeries take?
So I was lucky that because I wanted vaginoplasty from the start, and usually they approve you for it if you've been 1 year on hormones. I think it's 1 year. Not entirely sure about that though, but because I had, you have to go for hair removal in the genital area before you can have the vaginoplasty, because otherwise you can get hair on the inside of the new vagina, and that's something which obviously you don't want, but is also dangerous. So, and my hair and my skin, or the laser, wasn't very effective for me. So I had to go for electrolysis, and that was also not very effective for me. So it took for me a long, long time before the hair growth had been reduced sufficiently enough in order for me to get the vaginoplasty. And that really, and also COVID, I mean, I hated the lockdown, but thank COVID because it did save me from getting vaginoplasty, because the hospital had to close down and they couldn't do the surgery, so it took longer for me. Because there was this moment where I decided to detransition, and a month later, or like 1.5 months later, I was called that it was my turn for the vaginoplasty, that they could schedule me. So I really dodged the bullet there.
Kind of 6 weeks after you decided to detransition, you were given this appointment.
Yep.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
So yeah, very lucky with that.
So how did you get to that point of deciding?
So first, I'm gonna answer your previous
Oh,
question.
sure.
Sorry, but yeah. So the facial feminization surgery, I think I had it after 2 years of no, yeah, 2 years and a few months of hormones, and the vaginoplasty was never happened, thank God. But like I said, after 1 year, you can take whatever surgery you want if you are eligible for it. How did I get to the point to detransition? I noticed very early on that especially being on hormones and socially transitioning, living as a trans woman, it didn't really make me happy. It alleviated my distress about my body, I thought, but it didn't really make me happy because my quality of life was just awful. I was, again, very isolated, whereas before before I started hormones and before I was kind of living this sort of androgynous presentation in university, I had quite a good life. I had a social life. I went out a lot. I traveled, whatever. The problem I had back then was that I had this tunnel vision of I need to transition and then I'm happy. That's the problem I had, and I didn't get out of that, and that is the thing I regret the most. And also, of course, I got older, but then I transitioned, and especially after I had the facial feminization surgery, because I had this mindset of I need to turn. At first, it was hormones, and then I would be happy, and then that didn't turn out, and then I needed the facial feminization surgery, and then I would be happy, and then it didn't really turn out what I expected from it. And then I was looking for other things, like, oh, now it's my shoulders, now it's my hips, so now I need to do something about this. And I was looking on the internet for procedures that can change that. And then at a certain point, it was just hitting me like, what am I even doing? Like, how did I get to this point?
I remember you described to me you were looking at hips. You'd gone down the body and you were looking at hips, and that was the kind of that was the moment of clarity.
Meaning like surgery
Yeah.
for the hips? Is that what you mean? Okay.
Yeah, it was more like my body shape, I suppose, because I had broad shoulders and narrow hips, and I wanted more of the hourglass shape. So I was looking for surgeries that could do that. Until eventually I kind of, like I said, I was thinking to myself, what am I doing? As a guy, I never really paid that much attention to what I look like. I mean, I wasn't comfortable with what I look like, but it didn't consume my life. And at this point, it literally consumed my life. I couldn't go out in public without being worried how people will perceive me, how I look. It was something I was like, whether I was passing or not, it was something I was always paying attention about. So I felt like whenever I was outside, I couldn't relax because I was always like watching out for this. And obviously, that is exhausting. So it started as soon as I went on hormones, because as soon as I went on hormones, I was just hyper focused on like the changes. When do I look like a woman? And I was really nitpicking everything, and I was hyper focused on what I look like. And also when I went out, on how people perceive me. So I just couldn't relax when I went out. So I started to isolate, because whenever I got outside of the door and was with people, I just felt exhausted. So I'd rather stay inside. So I started isolating, and I lost a lot of friends again, which is sad because before, like I said, my life was pretty good. and it sucks that I didn't realize this earlier, but so yeah, and then when I was looking for the hips, I started realizing this, like, as a guy, I never had this. As a guy in my life, I wasn't comfortable with what I looked like, but my life was just much easier and it was much better, and I could relax much more. I was less tense, I was less anxious.
Yeah. You also talked about like the kind of the combination of extreme loneliness and being gay as like a risk factor that was identified. I'm not sure which studies you were referring to, but I'm just thinking about that because you're describing like you went from having a social life and being pretty okay in some areas, and then you were super isolated. So do you want to talk a little bit about that part?
Yeah, so in high school, I was very isolated because I was very unhappy and I was gay, and I tried to fight that as much as I could. Um, and that's what this study that I told you about, it is Cohen Kettenis, I think it was 2004. It's a Dutch article. But in the article, she talks about, and the Cohen Kettenis is the researcher at the Amsterdam hospital who also published the article, or the publication with the Dutch protocol. She developed the Dutch protocol. And back in 2004, she warned about these big issues surrounding medicalizing, trans kids. That out of the boys, underage boys that receive this diagnosis of, back then it was called gender identity disorder, 80% of them turn out to be gay once they reach adulthood, or into young adulthood, into their 20s. And they desist from their desire to become a woman. And the one very big risk factor that at the Amsterdam clinic they found was that a lot of these boys, in their childhood and in their teenage years, they were very lonely, and they had troubles with relationship with their peers, and I was exactly that. I was isolated, I was gay. So given that I was such a textbook example, which they themselves warned for 10 years prior or 11 years prior, and they did not know how, like, they didn't manage to get me out, I think that's very worrying.
Did you work directly with Steensma and DeVries? I mean, I can
No.
imagine these are huge clinics with lots of clinicians.
Yeah, so no, I never saw either Steensma or De Vries.
But you went back to confront the providers at the Dutch clinic where you were seen. Is that correct?
Yes, and that's um, also a bit. I'm trying to tell the story a bit chronologically, but what I wanted to say before, with regards of like the study that we just talked about, is that when I said that in university before I really transitioned, I had like a fairly good life. I went out of high school, but I had already found this trans label and I had already latched onto it, and I had already this mindset of I need to transition and then I'm happy. But at the time when I found this trans identity, I was very isolated and I was very unhappy. And I should have, once I reached the university, I should have, let it go. But sadly, I that didn't happen, because at the clinic I was seeing at the time, the therapist, they only affirmed me. So, and also I had already gotten the diagnosis. I think if they had been more clear about that to them, it was also difficult, and they hadn't given me the diagnosis so quickly, and that they were still exploring things, I might have desisted on my own. But because they gave me this diagnosis so quickly, I felt like, okay, well, they're the professionals, so if they say that this is me, it must be right. So I, just like my mother, I placed a lot of trust in them.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not weird, because
Right.
they're
That's
supposed to be
right.
the professionals, but they're not. they're very incompetent and they don't know what they're doing at all. But I didn't realize that at the time. Anyway, so after I had the surgery, the facial feminization surgery, I realized it wasn't really what I expected, and my life before was easier, and I kind of started to miss, not necessarily being a guy, but I started to miss the life that I used to have. And also because I was passable, like more passable as a woman, not entirely, but people didn't stare at me anymore at the street. And that was what I wanted. So I had what I wanted, basically, and I still wasn't happy. So I kind of felt like, why did I do this if this didn't make me happy, And so that was like the first kind of signs that I received from like regret, but I still tried to convince myself, like, I don't regret it. I did this, I needed this, and this made me happier than I ever was before. And obviously that wasn't true, but I tried to convince myself of that because I did not want this to happen to me. I did not want to regret this. And then also stuff happened with my family again, which just brought up a lot of these emotions again that I had all these years just put away, that I had not also at the therapist with the gender clinic had not been explored at all. They just came back, and it was like I was reliving the whole thing again. And that kind of gave me the insight of, so that's why I felt like this. So that's why I wanted to be a woman. So the reason why I wanted to be a woman was because I felt lonely, and I thought it was going to be easier. So that's where it came from. Or not necessarily why I wanted to be a woman, but why I hated being a guy and why I hated myself, and that it actually had a lot more to do with self-hatred more than, my gender. So, but at that time I still hadn't decided to detransition, and I was also still planning on doing the vaginoplasty. Don't ask me why. I guess it was just I was put on this track,
Yeah.
and it was, getting off of that track was just a step too far still at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But I did think about it a lot. I thought I kept having this idea of like, if I had known what I knew now, I would not have done it.
Which is hard because nobody knows what they know now in the past. I mean, this is like
Exactly.
such a difficult place to be. It's such
Yeah.
self-torture as well to think about that. And yet, how could you not think about it? Like, okay, keep going.
Yeah. So, I don't know, and as the more that progressed and the more time that went by, the more I kind of felt like this isn't it, and the more I felt like I wish I had just hadn't done it, and I wish I just was a boy, like, or like a guy. I wish I just was normal, I suppose. I wish I could go back to this life where I didn't have to worry about all these things, and it was so much easier. Even though physically speaking, I didn't like my body. And these kind of thoughts, they kept occurring all the time for a few months. And eventually I reached this point where I was like, okay, I need to figure this out first before I do any surgeries. So at least I had that figured out. And not very short after that, I think maybe 2-3 weeks after that, I decided, because I was thinking about like, I wish I hadn't done it for so long. I just decided eventually, now I have to do it. Now I just have to go back. Now I just have to stop this. I just have to do it now. And that's when I kind of decided, okay, I'm going to quit hormones. I'm not going to do the surgery. I'm going to change back. This is it. And it felt initially like a huge relief, because I just felt like this burden, it just got lifted off me, because I felt that I could just go back living a simpler life, basically. And all these worries that I had about passing and constantly looking at other people and constantly comparing myself to other people and not feeling feminine enough and whatever, I could just like put all that in the garbage bin. And it felt so like such a relief, basically. But obviously, as more time progressed, I started to realize what I had actually done, because I also had the surgery, and so it became a very hard period. And I also told my gender therapist, who had supervised me for all this time throughout my whole transition, and eventually I had an appointment with her, and it was over the phone because it was during COVID. And I told her that things had been going on and whatever, and how I'd been feeling lately. And I just told her I think I literally told her I don't think I'm trans after all. And she was shocked. She was really surprised. And I think she also felt very, very guilty that she didn't stop me. But I don't know. I at that time when I told her, I didn't feel very. I still was, even though I had decided to detransition, I didn't feel any regret of doing this. I still tried to convince myself that no, I needed this and this. I don't regret anything, which is ridiculous. But I guess it was just trying to protect me from. I tried to protect myself from this feeling of regret, because I did not want to feel that at all. But obviously that didn't last very long, because eventually it kicked in anyway. And once it kicked in, it was very difficult. Also, given that this surgeon, I think if I had the facial feminization surgery and she actually did what I wanted, what I talked about with her, it would not have been such a big issue. But because she did these changes and I had these complications, it became a lot more difficult. So the gender clinic, eventually, I still continue to see them. And from them also came the question if they could continue to see me, because they thought they could learn a lot from me, because they said that detransition doesn't happen a lot. And I was like, yeah, sure. Because at that time I didn't really feel, like I said, I was trying to protect myself from regret, so I wasn't necessarily angry at them. But the more time progressed, and as soon as this regret kicked in, it was very difficult, and then it was, and I kind of got very angry at them. But I hadn't found another therapist that could help me. So I continued to see them, because I felt like, even though I had no faith in them anymore, it was better to see someone rather than no one. But especially in the last, eventually I found another therapist and I continued to see her. But because they had this question, because they said they could learn a lot from me, I still continued to see them. But like I said, the more time progressed, the more angry I got, and the more I thought about what actually happened and what they did, and rather what they didn't do.
What sort of age were you at this point?
22. So I had been on hormones from 18 to 22, so almost 4 years, three years and like something months, almost 4 years.
I bet that was a weird experience to like for the rage to start appropriately coming to consciousness and the realization of what
Yeah,
happened, and at the same time trying to help them learn from you. Like that seems like a very bizarre place to be. You're trying to figure out what the hell just happened to yourself, and you're still in contact with the clinicians. Can you talk a little bit about that? That seems very hard.
yeah. Um, like I said, the when I just the regret didn't kick in immediately, and the decision to detransition also didn't kick in immediately. It was a very slow process that took almost a year, before it had really kind of, I don't know, happened. and even still, I feel like it's still going on, although the biggest part is definitely done. And I guess I can kind of compare it to de-radicalizing, because I was so into this trans ideology, almost cult, almost, honestly, even though I wasn't really a big part of trans social groups. There was this big belief in, like, I have gender dysphoria and this is the only solution, and trans women are real women, and all this, like, beliefs that, if I think about it now, it just makes no sense to me now. I cannot imagine that I ever believed in it and that I was so deep into it. I cannot imagine that, but I was. So that's why I feel like it's really kind of de-radicalizing, which I found very shocking. And at a certain point, it kind of hit me. I was like, especially because I started looking for answers again on the internet, which is, obviously now I was an adult, so I knew a bit better how to go about it. But and I started looking more, like, because I was in university at this point for certain years, and I kind of figured, like, okay, I'm not a psychologist. I don't even study anything related to psychology at all, but I know how to read scientific papers, so I'm just going to make an attempt. And I was, like, looking for these academic papers about the psychology of being trans and medicalization of trans. And that's when I found also the study which says that 80% was gay, of minors, of male minors. And that's when I kind of had this feeling, like, okay, now I kind of know how it's really like. It kind of hit me. And I started having all these questions related to my transition and how I was treated. And that's why I went back eventually. I asked them if I can have the one that I was still seeing, because she said that she could learn from me. I asked if I can have an appointment with her, a researcher from the hospital, or with someone who has knowledge of what is going on or is in charge of what is going on. And I'm not sure who honestly, I'm not sure who I talked to eventually, but I think she was kind of the team, like the leader of the team, or the boss of the team, or manager of the team of psychologists that they had. And I forgot what her name was. And I had all these questions about all these things, and it was like I had to. It was like talking to a wall. They did not listen to me at all, and I tried, because I had these things from all these, like, studies and papers, and I was asking them about it, and they said, yeah, because I was still thinking, I'm not a psychologist, so maybe I didn't read them right. So I asked them this, and basically making a short summary of the article, and it seemed like I understand it quite well. And then I asked these questions, like, trying to be critical, and then it just gave me, like, such bullshit answers. Also, when I related it to my own transition, so for example, and now I have to think, because I'm sorry, it's a lot.
Well, while you're thinking, we had a similar experience, I think.
Okay. So, God, what was the question? I think the one that I asked them was related to the detransition rate, and I try to make them realize that they don't. Even though there's these studies that say that the detransition rate is very low, they're not very reliable, and it's very difficult to find detransitioners in the first place, because the study that they it's conducted by them from their population. But detransitioners tend to not want any contact with them anymore. I certainly don't want any contact with them anymore. After this last final appointment that I had with them. And they also acknowledged that, like, the researchers themselves acknowledged that in this study. They said that the detransition or regret rate was very low. It was like 1 point something % or something. but we lost contact with like 30% of the patient population. So it might be as high as 30%. You don't know, So it's very likely much higher, and they acknowledged that. And then I kind of made the suggestion, like, don't you need to be very careful if you don't know what the actual percentage is? And they said, yeah, but we are very careful and blah blah blah. And then I tried to get into that, especially related to my transition. And I asked them about my mother, because my mother had warned them for basically the exact. She was right all along. The thing that she warned for turned out to be the truth, but they didn't really listen to her, and they didn't take her serious at all. And then their answer was basically, yeah, but some parents are transphobic, and some parents, they have issue with their child transitioning. But and this was the thing that I tried to make them clear a lot of times, but they just it seemed to just go past them. It seemed to not make any impact on them. They assume a lot of things. They see that certain things are the case for some patients, and because of that, they think it's the case every time they encounter this. So they don't look, they're not exploring, they don't do research, they just assume. But yeah, whenever I try to make them see that, it didn't make any impact. And also what I told you about, like, the self-esteem, that they realized that self-esteem was so important for me, and they still allowed me to start hormones, even though they themselves were worried whether I would even ever reach a point that I would accept myself.
Yeah, can you flush that out a little bit? I think we talked about that maybe before we had started recording. You discovered after the fact that they had actually flagged your lack of self-esteem even early on in the process.
Yeah. So, and this has a lot to do with the passing. So passing was very important to me. I realized that in hindsight. At the time, not necessarily. And it's very weird because I had these, and I think also that's what therapists are for. You have these behaviors and these thought patterns, and therapists are there to make you aware of it, but they didn't make me aware of it at all. I got aware of them because I grew up and got older. But so looking back at that time already, I realized passing for me was very important, and I started to wonder, why did you never question that? Why did you never, like, they never told me? And I understand you're not going to tell one of your patients you're never going to pass, because that's just going to piss them off, but you can keep it vague. Like, and I literally told them the exact same thing to them. You can just say, like, maybe because passing is so important for you, maybe did you ever think that what will you do if that's not possible? Because hormones are not like some sort of wonder pill that is going to fix everything. And for some people, they change a lot, and other people, they change not a lot. So even if you don't look very masculine, it's not a guarantee that hormones are going to make you passable.
You said you were tall. Are you like 6 foot, or are you 5'10" or 6'2" or?
Yeah, I'm taller, but I'm not like that. I'm not 2 meters or something. It's not like I could be just a tall woman,
Okay.
Um, but still, I was kind of self-conscious about my height. Anyway, from that conversation about passing, we went about to the conversation about self-esteem, and I'm not exactly sure how we made that switch, how that went, but I asked them about it. Why did you? Because the reason why I didn't do the real life phase was because I was afraid for other people's reactions, and I had very low self-esteem. So why didn't you try to treat that before? Why didn't you talk about that? Because I don't remember anything that you really questioned about that. And that's when they said, "Oh, but we actually talked about it a lot." And then I was asking them, like, "Oh, really? Then what did we say?" And then they got, like, the old reports from back then, from the archive, or on the computer. And then they said that, yeah, we talked about this a lot, and I was actually worried that self-esteem was like such an issue, and whether you were actually going to reach a point where you would ever accept yourself. And when they said that, I got so angry. I was thinking, and I was telling this to them: how can you let a teenager who with self-esteem issues, how can you let them start hormones and surgeries when you are yourself doubting if there's ever going to be a point where they are going to accept themselves? Like, that's stupid. Why would you ever do that? And then they had this bullshit excuse of that trans people usually have low self-esteem because of dysphoria and whatnot, and it's ridiculous. And again, I try to tell them, yeah, but you're assuming that, you're not looking into that. You're assuming my self-esteem issues are because I'm trans. You never, and I try to tell them this as well. They assume every side issue that they encounter is a direct result of dysphoria rather than the opposite. They don't look into whether dysphoria is a symptom of other stuff going on. And they say that they did, but I know they don't. And also with the affirming, I try to make them realize that this affirming that they do all the time, it's very kind of like toxic and dangerous, because I came there with these beliefs that, you know, my desire to transition was, what it really came down to was having these feelings that there was so much wrong with me and I needed to fix this. And by affirming my, you know, trans identity, and by affirming this idea that I need to transition, they automatically affirm this belief that there is stuff wrong with me and that I need to fix something. And I tried to make them realize that, and all they could say to me was, yeah, but you should not have seen it like that. And I told them, I know I should not have seen it like that, but I'm a teenager and I have mental issues, so of course that's what, you know, I realize you don't intend to do that, but you are doing that. But they just didn't realize that. And God, what else? There were so many things. I stopped after this appointment. I stopped seeing them because I got so frustrated. Because, like I said, I was talking to a wall.
So you were trying to. They said we want to learn from detransition. You explained to them where they went wrong, and it sounds like they didn't have the mental depth, which frankly resonates with me from our own experiences, that there was a lack of emotional depth or understanding of what it is to be human.
Yes.
Made it almost impossible for them to understand your points.
Yeah, the superficiality. Everything that you say is taken at face value. Nobody thinks there's a deeper story behind the story. This child might be overcompensating. There's a deep unconscious process the kid's not aware of right now. There's no belief in that. Everything is whatever you say. You know, they interviewed you. They said, how do you know you're not gay? Well, I don't identify with gay. Check the box, moving on. And I don't think they mean badly, but they don't have the depth. I mean, it sounds arrogant, but they're not that deep. They're just not that deep.
It reminds me of that phrase, deep down, you're quite shallow. And it's almost like I'm thinking about the gender affirmative approach, and I'm thinking, is it that shallow and superficial minds are very attracted to it? That it's a simplistic way of approaching the human psyche that is actually very satisfying, because it makes it very easy to tick the boxes. You are what you say you are today, forever, and off we go. And I can see why somebody would cling on to that, because it's like we have the solution to life.
Well, I have my ideas about this, because I actually, I was looking for another therapist because I had lost faith in them. This was like when I was still like an emotional wreck, like a few months before I had this final appointment with them. And I started looking for therapists that have some experience with gender but are critical and don't affirm necessarily. So I saw this. Oh, something I forgot to tell. So something that also played a big role in my desire to transition eventually was seeing a documentary that had actually been released a few years prior, in 2018, about a man who was older, who had regretted his transition, and who also was like only affirmed by therapists, even though his actual problem was what's it called, borderline personality disorder and PTSD. Because for months I did realize this didn't make me happy, and I kind of wish I hadn't done it, but I still had this feeling like, but they diagnosed me, and they, they said that this was what I should do, and they said that I was trans, so what else is it, and I was afraid that if I was going to go back it would just get worse. And then I saw that documentary, and then I kind of realized, so because I had heard about malpractices of therapists in America, but not about the Netherlands. I thought like, oh, but here they do it
The right
carefully.
way. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then I saw this documentary, and then I realized, oh shit, it's happening here as well. And then it didn't take a long time before I realized this was a mistake. This is not what I should have done at all, or after all. So that was also an important thing in my decision to detransition, and that happened, I think, a few weeks before I eventually made the decision. Now I have to go back. But anyway, so in this documentary, there was a woman who was interviewed because she used to work at the Amsterdam clinic, and she was critical, and she didn't affirm, and she but she eventually resigned because patients were complaining about her because she was, one of the difficult ones. So patients didn't like her.
Meaning she was kind of challenging them or asking them to think about
Yeah,
these important things. Okay.
exactly.
Keep going.
So, and in the documentary, she was telling about this, and eventually she said she resigned because she could not. She didn't agree with the protocol that they were following and the policy that they were following. So she resigned eventually, and I reached out to her, and she helped me with the whole thing. But so I think that the critical ones. There are plenty of critical therapists that would be interested in this topic, but they just either don't get involved, or they resign because they don't agree with this policy of affirming, and because it has also become so politicized. And I think the politicization of whole gender care is one of the major issues, because if you don't affirm, you're a bigot. And if you don't affirm, then this is conversion therapy, and you're converting trans people into cis people. And it's become such a politicized ideological stronghold, and I think that's the main issue. So people who don't affirm and people who are critical, they get filtered out. They either resign, or they don't get hired, or they are reported, or etc.
I know we're probably going to be approaching the end of our conversation. I want to ask a question that I'm aware we didn't get to. When you started all this medical intervention, had you ever had any sexual relationships in real life with boys or young men?
No, never.
Was that explored at all? Was that raised
No,
as a concern?
I think they asked me once, and I told them I'd rather wait before pursuing any sexual relationship after I had vaginoplasty, because I didn't want to have gay sex, basically. And again, they just took it. They didn't challenge that.
We better close it up. It's been an extraordinary conversation.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and
I still have a lot to tell, though.
What do you want the listeners to understand?
That if you are not from the Netherlands and you believe that here things are all fine, and they are, we are supposedly doing the things the right way, we are not. Definitely not. And I think and it's already starting here also, that, these scandals about how lax these therapists have been treating especially young people and mentally ill people, it's going public more, it's being talked about more. And also, transitioning is not always the answer for dysphoria. I think dysphoria is very complex and can have a lot of causes and a lot of, for example, in my case, I've always had some form of dysphoria, if you want to call it like that. But I never, transitioning was never going to be the answer. And the reason it got so severe, my dysphoria was never that difficult, but it became very difficult because of so many other things that were surrounding it. And I think before medical transition is being discussed, first, look into therapy, like psychology. If you can alleviate the distress with that, I think that is very important. And I'm thinking there was one thing I wanted to tell about this final appointment that I had with them, something that I also wanted to make them see, but I cannot think about it right now. Was about it was about, because at this point the way I see it now is that dysphoria is complex and transition is not always the answer, but back then I still had this idea that you're either really trans or you're not. But there can be a lot of reasons why someone would feel discomfort about their natal sex. And I try to make them see that they didn't really investigate that that not everyone that comes to them with distress about their sex necessarily is trans or transitioning is the best option, and they should question it more. And I think I literally asked them, for me, when I came there, sex was my gender was such an obsession, and looking back, it was not healthy at all. It was obsessive. And I asked them, why didn't you try to challenge that? Because a normal, quote unquote, normal person does not think about their gender that much. They just are. It's kind of how I am right now as well. I'm a man because that's what I'm born as, but that's it. And then they said something like, yeah, but they found that difficult to do because the people who enter their clinic are exactly the people to whom it is so important. So if they were going to say, it's not such a big deal, then that would be offensive or something. I don't know. And I wanted to make them see that they need to be much more careful, because they can really fuck people's life with this. They can really ruin people's lives with this. But then they said, yeah, but some people can get really happy from it, and we don't want to withhold these people their chances of being happy. So I don't think they even added anything after that. So basically, what they're saying is we just give people the benefit of the doubt because we don't want to stand in the way for their happiness, even though it can possibly fuck them up. What they also told me a lot of times was, and they didn't say this in these exact words, but what it came down to was, yeah, you wanted it, as if it was my fault.
I almost feel like conceptually, the idea that there's a trans person that we have to defer to their desires and their obsessions is incompatible with a real therapeutic process where you give a human being a chance to explore why they feel the way they feel. It's like those two things feel incompatible. And I think they were operating from the assumption that you're a trans person and that means something specific, and we have to help you be yourself. That's the whole philosophy, seems like to me.
Exactly.
I think your story and also your observations about what the clinic missed and trying to confront them on it, I think that is going to be mind-blowing for a lot of listeners who, like you said, think, oh, well, the Dutch are careful. They all have childhood dysphoria. They early, had these signs very early, and people think that safeguards everyone from making errors, but I think your story is really powerful in that way.
Yeah, I hope so.
How are you doing now? I mean, I know we have to go, but just I know detransition is a very complicated and long journey in and of itself, but how are you doing now?
Um, it goes up and down, but it's definitely improving. If I look back at where I was last year, when the whole detransition was all still fresh and new. I mean, still is, because a year is nothing, but it's been there's been a lot of progress. So I'm glad with that, but it is difficult, and it's not going to be, it's something I'm going to have to carry with me for the rest of my life. Basically, it did leave a mark on me, and I'm not sure if I'm ever going to get over it completely, which is painful. Also because of not just physically, because obviously like the hormones and the surgery, um, they have had a physical mark, but also like psychologically, mentally, emotionally. Oh god, yeah, it was. I'm sorry, I have so much to say. But with the endocrinologist, it was also what I also found kind of mind blowing was that they told me that the medicine they would give me was completely safe and reversible, and it's God, what it is called? It's a triptolurine or something. It's decapeptyl, which is used to treat prostate cancer, which they didn't tell me, but I found out later. And when I detransitioned, it gave me, especially in like genital area, a lot of dysfunction and atrophy. And I was worried about that never coming back. And I questioned them on it, and they said like, yeah, no, it should all go back. And then I asked them, how do you know? Are there any studies on this? And they told me, in theory, it should all go back. But if you say in theory it should go back, in medicine, it basically means you know nothing.
Yeah. Same with puberty blockers. That's what they say. In theory, puberty will resume.
Exactly. So the triptolurine decapeptyl stuff that they gave me is the same medicine that they use for puberty blockers in teenagers and children, even though I got cross-sex hormones with it as well. So technically, in my case, it wasn't puberty blockers, but it's the same stuff. And there are studies on it in like for the treatment of cancer. And if you look at the stuff, like articles that talk about this stuff being used for cancer patients, they will talk about complications, and they will talk about like side effects, some of which are permanent, especially for like for infertility, penile shrinkage, like atrophy. God, what is it called? Erectile dysfunction, all that stuff. And those can be permanent even after only a few months. And I've been on it for years. And even when I asked them about it, they were not aware of this at all. Even though if you go probably to a clinic for cancer and you ask them about it, they probably know it. But the gender clinic doesn't. So why? Like, what are they missing?
It's unbelievably enraging how flip and casual they are about the way they suggest and prescribe and determine and assess and diagnose and obviously Stella and I, this is our work, we know all this stuff very well, but it's just so unbelievable to hear like an actual account from beginning to end of how this looks in a person's life. And I know, Teiresias, you have a lot to say, and you're also yourself in a process of making sense of all this. We would love to maybe have you come back, maybe several months down the line, see how things are going with you. If you'd be interested to come back, I imagine you'll have a lot of reflections and things to say. I could tell you have a lot of value to offer. So would you be willing to come back on and maybe continue the conversation?
Yes, of course. I would love to.
Okay.
Thank you. It was
Yeah.
absolutely very moving and sad, but very important story. A very, very important story, I think I told.
Yeah, thank you so much for telling us.
Yeah, thank you for listening, and thank you for having me on.
Thanks for joining us this week on Gender, A Wider Lens. This podcast is sponsored by Rhyme and GenSpect, and listener support means a lot to us. The best way to help is to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
Follow us on social media, and if you'd like to become a patron, you'll have access to weekly transcripts of the show, special Q&As, and you can join our listener community. Just go to our Linktree. That's linktr.ee/widerlenspod.
Our discussions are for educational purposes only and are not intended as a substitute for mental health services.